Okay, so let's go back. It's September 2008. If you were paying any attention at all, you could almost feel the ground shifting under the entire global economy.
Oh, absolutely. The headline was, of course, Lehman Brothers failed. But that doesn't even begin to cover it.
Not even close. This wasn't just one bank going under. This was the trigger. The one event that kicked off the biggest financial crisis since, what, 1929?
The Great Depression, yeah. And it was catastrophic. I mean, millions of people lost their jobs. So many companies just vanished. And the crazy thing is, most of us still don't fully grasp the mechanics of how it happened.
Right. And that's our mission for this deep dive. We've gone through the source material, and what we found is that this wasn't some unavoidable accident. This wasn't just the housing bubble popping.
Yeah. It was a chain of really intentional mistakes, a series of breathtaking risks that people actively chose to ignore.
And to set the scene here, you have to understand, Lehman Brothers wasn't some risky startup. This was a 150-year-old institution.
I mean, it had survived everything. World wars, other financial panics, recessions. It was considered, the definition of too big to fail.
Which makes the speed of its collapse so shocking. So how does an institution like that just evaporate? Let's get into what we're calling the anatomy of arrogance.
It really all starts in the early 2000s. The bank it shifted its entire strategy. They decided to go all in, making these huge concentrated bets on the U.S. real estate market.
And we're not talking about safe mortgages. We're talking about diving headfirst into the riskiest stuff. Subprime loans, these incredibly complicated bonds backed by those same loans.
And each new product they created was, as the sources put it, more complex and more risky. It was like a Jenga tower of debt.
A Jenga tower is the perfect analogy. But the complexity was almost a smokescreen, wasn't it? It hid the real core problem.
It did. The core problem was leverage. Extreme, almost unbelievable leverage. And this one detail. This really tells you everything you need to know about the arrogance of that era.
Okay, lay it on us. This is the number that everyone needs to hear. What was that ratio?
For every single dollar the bank actually had, its own money, its safety cushion, it was lending and betting $30.
Hurry.
30. A 30-to-1 ratio. For context, a heavily regulated bank today might be closer to 10-to-1. 30 is just, it's pure hubris.
Let's just translate that into plain English because it's terrifying. If you only have $1 backing $30 in bets, your assets only need to drop by a little over 3%, just 3%, and you're completely wiped out, insolvent, gone.
That's it. That's the whole game. A tiny dip in the market, and the entire 150-year-old bank vanishes.
Yeah.
It shows they had this almost religious belief that housing prices would go up forever.
And they were not just taking on this risk, they were actively trying to hide it. The source material talks about these accounting tricks.
Yeah. The sources call them legal, but deeply irresponsible. And what that really means is they were gaming the system.
So how did that trick actually work? Because it sounds so vague, but it was a calculated move.
It was. The goal was to make their books look healthier right at the end of every quarter. So they would do these temporary sales of their most toxic assets to another bank.
A sale, but not really a sale.
Exactly. It was a repurchase agreement, a repo. They'd sell it with a quiet promise to buy it right back in a few days, just after they filed their quarterly report.
So on reporting day, the balance sheet looks clean, the risk is gone, but a few days later, poof, it's right back on their books, just ticking away like a bomb.
It was a deliberate effort to mislead everyone. Regulators, analysts, the entire market. And it worked for a while.
Which brings up the big question, why? I mean, these are smart people. They had to know this was a catastrophic level of risk.
They were paid to ignore it. The entire culture was built around short-term profits and huge annual bonuses. If you generated massive revenue, nobody asked too many questions about the risk attached to it. You got celebrated.
And this is where it gets really interesting psychologically. When everything is going up, profits, house prices, your bonus, you stop asking the hard questions.
It's groupthink, a powerful force. The guy who puts his hand up and says, but what if house prices fall? He's not seen as prudent.
No, he's seen as the guy trying to ruin the party, the one standing in the way of that next multi-million-dollar bonus.
So those voices get silenced, or they leave, and you're left with this echo chamber, this illusion of safety fueled by greed.
And the assumption that even if it all went wrong,
They'd get bailed out. They truly believed the government would never let them fail. They basically outsourced their risk management to the U.S. taxpayer.
which of course brings us to 2007. The train starts to wobble. The housing market, after years of climbing, finally starts to cool off.
And that's all it took. That slight softening triggered the cascade. Subprime mortgage defaults started to just explode.
And because Lehman was holding the riskiest slices of that debt.
Right. Those slices were the first to go to zero, and with 30-to-1 leverage, their tiny capital buffer was it was obliterated almost overnight.
So suddenly, this giant of Wall Street is on its knees, scrambling.
Desperately. Looking for a buyer, another bank, anyone. They were still convinced the government would step in, just like they had for Bear Stearns.
They thought a bailout was guaranteed.
Absolutely. They couldn't imagine a world where the government would risk global chaos by letting them fail.
And then came that historic weekend in September 2008. After bailing out other institutions, the U.S. government made a decision that just shocked everyone.
They drew a line in the sand. They said, no more. They chose not to rescue Lehman Brothers.
And that was it. The bank collapsed, filed for bankruptcy, the largest banking failure in American history.
The implosion itself was instant. But the real damage, the systemic damage, this is the most important part of the story. The message it sent was terrifying.
What was the message?
If Lehman can fail, then nobody is safe.
And that's when the panic just went global. It stopped being about housing debt.
And it became a total crisis of confidence. The engine of the financial system just seized up. That engine is the interbank lending market.
Explain that. Why did banks just stop lending to each other?
Counterparty risk. Simply put, Bank A had no idea what toxic junk was sitting on Bank B's books. They were terrified that if they lent money to Bank B overnight, Bank B might not exist in the morning to pay it back.
So the trust just evaporated.
And completely. And you have to understand that short-term lending is like the oil in the economic engine. Without it, everything grinds to a halt.
And that's how the damage spread from Wall Street to Main Street.
Exactly. Suddenly, huge, healthy companies, car makers, retailers, you name it. It had nothing to do with subprime mortgages, but they couldn't get the basic loans they needed to operate, to pay their employees, to buy supplies.
So they weren't failing because of bad bets. They were failing because the credit system, the very plumbing of the economy, was frozen solid.
That's it. The initial cause was the leverage, that 30-to-1 bet. But the enormous global damage came from that total collapse of faith. It was a crisis of confidence.
So looking back at all of this, what's the big lesson here? What does the audacity of that bet teach us?
I think the main lesson from the sources is that huge market collapses don't happen because of one single event. They happen because of lots of small excesses, little bits of rule bending that are ignored for years.
Because the money is just too good?
Because the money is too good. And Lehman's fatal mistakes wasn't just the bet itself. It was the belief that they were untouchable, that the government was trapped and had to save them.
And when that bailout didn't come, the whole house of cards came down. It's a chilling lesson in what happens when people believe there are no consequences for their actions.
It really is. The ultimate moral hazard. They knew it was reckless, but they assumed we, the public, would end up footing the bill.
Which leaves us with that final, pretty uncomfortable question that the sources pose. It's something for you to think about. Given how quickly we forget, and how fast risky behavior comes back when profits are high, did we really learn anything from this story?
Or are we just waiting for the next one?